Emmanuel College, as you're leaving, just want to say a huge thank you for that this morning. Don't normally clap worship, but I think a round of applause. So our first keynote this morning is Nigel Genders. Some of you will know that Nigel has been here before. We had Nigel speak a couple of years ago. But it seemed appropriate that given the enormous amount of work that Nigel, as Chief Officer at the Church of England's Education Office, has been undertaking with the National Society Executive and his officers, working with all 41 dioceses across the country, and a theological reference group chaired by Professor David Ford, it certainly seemed highly appropriate that as we have been, as a group of dioceses across the country, beginning to look at the shaping of a fresh articulation of the Church's commitment to education, both within and beyond church schools, that it was right and proper to ask Nigel to be with us today, to come and say a little bit more about the vision for education from the Church of England Education Office, which has that title, Deeply Christian, Serving the Common Good. And that will be our beginning point for us today, thinking about this notion of vision, the Church's vision for education. And that is something which very much connects all of us. I was struck by that prayer just now about the fact that we are in different contexts, unique contexts. And certainly a national vision is not about making you all the same. And I know that Bishop Jonathan will say more about that as we talk after coffee about our own diocesan vision for and hope for education across this rather large diocese. But you know, that prayer was very much about us working together as a family. And from the diocesan education team's point of view, that's very much what we are trying to do in supporting you in your key role as leaders of our church schools, is helping that family to flourish and to support each other. So it's great to have Nigel with us this morning, and I very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Richard, and it's great to be back. It's great to come back to Harrogate and to this lovely venue and to be with such lovely people. So it's great to be here, and I'm glad for the opportunity for a rematch and a return gig, which is fantastic. There's a lot of talk about vision at the moment. Countries, politicians, dioceses, we're all setting out that vision for the future. Richard mentioned that you're in for a treat with Philida's presentation this afternoon, and you certainly are. The last time I heard her, she came up with a fantastic phrase, which was that visions, and I've checked she wasn't planning on using it today, so it's fine, but it's visions should be lived and not laminated. And I think for those of us in schools who are into laminating everything, and you know, that's a really important message. Because we rightly expect people's vision to be matched by their action. So where that falls short, we quickly pick them up and say, why don't you practice what you preach? We want to see action that flows out of the vision. This is a lovely hotel. I was staying in a hotel at a conference recently. It was, I'm going to have to say the brand of the hotel because it's part of the story, but it's the Hilton Hotel. And I was reminded of their vision statement whilst I was there, which they had on the little cards all around the rooms. And their vision is to fill the earth with warmth and the light of hospitality. It's a great vision. Straightforward. But have a look on TripAdvisor. And you'll spot how often people refer to that vision when it doesn't quite deliver on the promise. Donald Trump has risen to power on the back of his vision to make America great again. And whatever you think about that and him, he's backing up the rhetoric with action. And we're seeing the consequences of that played out in his daily Twitter feed, or in the executive orders that he's signing, or in the policies that he's unleashing since taking office, doing the things that he said he would do. Theresa May wants to focus on action rather than vision. When she took office, she said this. She said, "A vision is nothing without the determination to see it through. No vision ever built a business by itself. No vision ever clothed a family or fed a hungry child. No vision ever changed a country on its own." That's why she's focused on setting out a 12-point plan for Brexit rather than simply describing a vision. But we need both. There's a Japanese proverb that says, "Vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision is a nightmare." Visions and plans need to operate within a clear understanding of the context of our time. And so it's important that we just talk a little about that context before we start thinking about the vision. Because the political context in the UK and in Europe and in America, in the wider world, has changed enormously over the last 12 months. Following the UK referendum, with rising nationalism in Europe, with the aftermath of the presidential election in the USA, there has been a massive change in people's thinking. The tone of political debate in the UK and beyond has shifted enormously. The Archbishop of Canterbury talked about this in his presidential address to General Synod just this February. It's well worth a read if you want to go onto the website and have a look at it. But he summarized the situation like this. He said, "We are in a time when the future offers a wide range of opportunity or of threat, a wider range of opportunity or of threat than we've been used to culturally, politically, and economically." He said there are 1,000 ways to explain the Brexit vote, or the election of President Trump, or the strength of the polls in Holland, or in France, looking at Madame Le Pen. Many other leaders in a nationalist or populist tradition of politics. 1,000 ways to explain that. But he said, almost certainly there is no simple explanation. Almost certainly the impact of globalization economically, or marginalization politically, or postmodernity culturally have played some role to some extent. But he was making the point, this is a deeply complex context that we're now facing. And your job is to try and steer a path through that for the students in your care. Again, the Prime Minister, in her Lancaster House speech earlier this year, set out her view that the result of the referendum should not be seen as a decision to turn inward and retreat from the world, because Britain's history and culture is profoundly internationalist. She said this, "I want this United Kingdom to emerge from this period of change stronger and fairer and more united and more outward-looking than ever before. I want us to be secure and prosperous and tolerant as a country, a magnet for international talent and a home to the pioneers and innovators who will shape the world ahead. I want us to be truly a global Britain, the best friend and neighbour to our European partners, but a country that reaches beyond the borders of Europe too, a country that goes out into the world to build relationships with old friends and new allies alike." And in setting it out like that, she's trying to tread the tightrope between the opportunities of globalization, which we must embrace on the one hand, and the fears around immigration, which she's having to tackle on the other. But that is an increasingly difficult tightrope to tread. And it's very easy to fall off with terrible consequences. So the aftermath of the US presidential election has led to a change in tone of much of the debate about immigration. The building of a wall, the promotion of America First, a travel ban for majority Muslim countries. It's led to this increasing sense of nationalism. And here, this last year in the UK has seen a worrying rise in the numbers of registered hate crimes or racial or cultural tensions, an increasingly nationalistic tendency in countries around us, leading not only to people talking about building walls, but implementing policies that are designed to keep others out. And that's the context that we're working in. So what's our response as school leaders? Well, at the core of our response as a church is the need to engage with society. And the primary engagement that we have is through education. That's how the church has always engaged with society most effectively and most readily. But that brings some challenges. The Archbishop, again, in that address, set out one of those challenges, said, look, we educate 1 million children in Church of England schools. We're embedded in the national history. And so when there are issues that we want to point a finger at, or when we are challenged by things like the fact that, according to the Office of National Statistics, white British on free school meals are rated the third lowest of 18 ethnic categories for educational achievement, then if we're going to say anything about that, we need to ask some questions of ourselves about that first, if we've got this massive stake in education. And so as we address all of these questions, not simply by pointing the finger at others, we need to be clear about what our bigger vision for education really is. If we're truly going to do something meaningful for the communities that we serve, we've got to ask those questions. And so, as Richard says, the Church of England has been developing its thoughts on this over the last year. And we've clear that our vision is one that is deeply Christian, serving the common good. And you'll see that on the strapline of the lovely glossy that you've been given to take away. And I hope that you've already had a chance to see it and read it. Now, this, as we've produced it, is not intended to be original, and everyone think, oh yeah, we'd never thought of that before. But rather it sets out a fresh articulation of our vision so that we can renew our confidence in what we're seeking to do together in education. And this vision is not an added extra which we bolt onto our schools once we've managed to get our attainment figures right or met the requirements of Ofsted. But it's at the heart of what we do. Yes, we are about excellence in education. We are about the highest standards for every child. And this is how we get there. Because it's the vision that drives the outcomes. It's the ethos that drives the outcomes, not the other way round. So do we get it by simply focusing on school improvement techniques and attainment in seemingly ever-decreasing numbers of subjects that are considered as important anymore? Or is that goal more properly achieved by having a broader view of what we think education is for? Well, our conviction is that it's the latter. Ethos enhances outcomes. When we took this vision document to the House of Bishops for their view and comment as we were putting it together, they were really enthusiastic about it. One diocesan bishop said this. He said, "Up until now, my main defense for the church's involvement in education has been that we've been around a long time and we've got a lot of schools and parents like them." Well, all those things are true. We have been around a long time, we have got a lot of schools, and parents do like them. But here, he argued, in this document, we have a fuller articulation of something which provides a rationale for why we're so committed to education, what our vision for it really is. But before we look very briefly at the broad themes in the vision, I want to say something about the breadth of the vision, and as a consequence, the reason for the strapline: deeply Christian, serving the common good. When we set out to produce the document, one of the main questions that we asked ourselves was, what's this vision for? Is this a vision for Church of England schools? Or is it the Church of England's vision for education? Now that may sound like semantics, but it's a really important question. So one of the questions about the document has been, why don't you use the term that we're so used to, which is distinctively Christian, in the strapline? We say our vision is deeply Christian, rather than distinctively Christian. Is that a watering down of some sort, people fear? Well, we focused in recent years on our Church of England schools being distinctive, and rightly so, because in years gone by there was a worry that the Christian ethos of some of our schools had amounted to little more than morals and manners, and perhaps an inclination towards leniency in the behaviour policy. So we have over the years sought to ensure that our Church of England schools are more distinctively Christian than they were, for instance, than when I was at primary school many years ago now, which I only found out was a Church of England primary school many years after I left. So yes, we are very keen for our church schools to be distinctive. Watering down that Christian identity is quite the opposite of our agenda. But this change in language is a deliberate shift. At a time when the Church of England is the largest single provider of education in this country, when many non-church schools are looking for a vision of education to infuse and inspire them, now is not the time to retreat into a distinctively Christian corner and say, well, just look after our bit. We've got something to offer the whole nation. Just as Joshua Watson and his friends did 200 years ago when they founded the National Society. Our deeply Christian vision of education is one that is generous and that seeks to allow the riches of the Christian life to overflow to those of other faiths, respecting their difference, but building an ever more inclusive community, grounded in the story of our faith. And so our conclusion has been that this is a moment to be bold and ambitious, to offer more than an apologetic for church schools, but to offer a Christian vision for education. Now, obviously, it will be worked out explicitly within the Christian character of our church schools. And we do want to do more and better on that. And so, for instance, we're in the process of developing and strengthening the denominational inspection framework, SIAMS, to ensure that schools develop their distinctive character in line with their clear vision for education. But our vision is also about shaping wider educational policy and embracing community schools which are drawn to us because they recognize in this vision that we're articulating something deeper and richer than the often functionalist or utilitarian view of education that has become the dominant narrative. It's a deeply Christian vision for education for the common good. But it will be worked out authentically and explicitly as the underpinning Christian vision for Church of England schools. So, for example, it's the basis on which we responded to the last government consultation about schools that work for everyone, which you'll have seen trailed again in the budget this week. Our fundamental commitment is that every pupil should be enabled to flourish, whatever their background. The priority for an improving school system should be to ensure that this is made possible for each person, no matter the circumstances into which they are born or the struggles they may face as learners. It's not for the select few, not just for the faithful. High-quality education should be available to all. And so we'll continue to work to ensure that excellent provision is available everywhere for everyone. Our vision is a vision for education which refuses to make artificial choices between academic rigor and the well-being of pupils, their intellectual and spiritual and emotional development, because you can't split those things up. We're unequivocal in our message that there's no such distinction. A good education promotes life in all its fullness, academic rigor and the well-being of pupils. That's the heart of our vision. And there are 4 basic elements to it, which we'll just run through briefly if you've got it in front of you. But there are 4 basic elements which run through the whole approach that we've set out, which together form what we're calling an ecology of what the fullness of life means. First, we're educating for wisdom, knowledge, and skills. So while our vision for education must avoid at all costs reducing the individual to an economic unit, which is how the government often refer to children these days, it is clear that good schools must foster confidence and delight and discipline in seeking wisdom and knowledge and truth and understanding and know-how and the skills needed to shape life well. So we must, we must do everything we can to prepare young people to face a complex world, one that's very different from the one that we've been used to living in. It's vital that we provide them with the academic skills and capabilities and the creativity and the emotional intelligence that ever more complex worlds demand. But our aim is not simply to fill heads with knowledge, but to enable young people to grow in wisdom and understanding. Wisdom is not a word that you'll see very often in a DFE document. We talk a lot about knowledge in education. But how are we enabling our children to grow in wisdom and understanding? That's the first key part of our ecology of vision for the flourishing of every child. Secondly, we're educating for hope and aspiration. Because in the drama of ongoing life, how we approach the future is crucial. Hope and aspiration are important. So much of our education system is set up to draw a line between success and failure. It's true at school level. Are you coasting or requiring improvement or good or outstanding? It's true at the individual level too. Have you made the grade? Have you passed? Have you passed the test, reached the bar? And yes, it is true that we need things that we can measure our effectiveness by and measure our impact. But we need to teach in a way that assures that failure is not the last option and the last word. Bad experiences, we say, wrongdoing, evil, they need not have the last word. Our schools must be transformative offering resources for healing and repair and renewal and teaching that meaning and trust and generosity and compassion and hope are all more fundamental than meaningless and suspicion and selfishness and hard-heartedness and despair. That kind of education will transform the lives of our young people and of your staff and of yourselves. Finding ways to work through difficulty rather than taking, particularly in school leadership, what has been described as the Premier League football manager approach to headship, which is that you get a very narrow window of opportunity to make a difference or you're sacked. Look at Leicester City. We need to get beyond that and educate for hope and aspiration. Thirdly, educating for community and living well together. Our schools should be places where our young people learn how to relate to the rest of the world and to their communities. They should be places where they grow to become a blessing for every child in their community which they serve. You know as well as I do that we're operating in an environment that views church schools with suspicion. But Church of England schools are increasingly diverse. Some still seem surprised when they hear of Church of England schools opening their doors to people of other faiths. There was an article recently in the Sunday Times that it seemed to have strike the journalists with some new revelation that the Church of England was running schools with people of other faiths in them. And within that article, Alan Smithers, who, you can't help but hear the name Smithers without conjuring up a particular image, can you? But he, as the head of the university in Buckingham, he said this in the article. He said that if in a majority Muslim area parents are sending their children to Church of England schools, then the natural step would be to turn those schools into secular schools instead of church schools. But as I followed up in another article and pointed out, that's not only illogical, it just misses the point entirely. We constantly hear from Muslim parents who tell us that they choose our schools precisely because we do take faith seriously. We offer an approach to education that gives attention to the spiritual as well as the academic development of our students. They welcome the opportunity to send their children to a school which will ensure mutual understanding of faiths, whilst being clear about the Christian heritage and underpinning narrative on which our ethos and values are based. So like millions of others who have attended such a school, and we reckon there are 15 million people in the country today who've attended a Church of England school, they know that we prepare children for life in modern Britain and in a world that needs to be increasingly connected. We're proud of that. Proud that our Church of England schools are modelling an education where no passports are required, where the doors are open to the communities that they serve. So this is not the time for us to retreat, but to lead the way in challenging all forms of sectarianism and some of the deep divisions in society. It's an education for community and living well together. The fourth and final element of the vision is an education for dignity and respect. Central to Christian theology is the truth that every single one of us is made in the image of God. To cause the dignity of a person to be undermined is to disregard that fundamental truth. The level of mental illness among children is at very worrying levels. And so human dignity is something we've got to show in practice by tackling those issues directly. Not because it meets a government target, but because educating for dignity and respect is about being both deeply and authentically Christian. Wanting the best for every child, for every member of our school community. That's what we're about. Giving children their dignity. So, wisdom, hope, community, and dignity. These four strands are at the heart of what we mean by flourishing, by life in all its fullness. They're our vision for education. But let me come back to Theresa May's words. A vision is nothing without the determination to see it through. The challenge with this vision is to ask as individual schools and as a whole family of schools in a diocese, so what? What difference does it make? This vision is not meant to give you all the answers so that you can simply lift down a set of techniques off the shelf and plug into the school at one end and expect to see great outcomes at the other, including an outstanding Ofsted and SIAMS inspection. It's not about that. It's not a straitjacket of a template, but a lens through which you can see your local context. In setting out this vision, we're offering a lens through which you can focus your local practice and enable you to address the particular issues in your context, to apply it in the reality. We're clear that this is the start of a conversation, locally, regionally, nationally. And so rather than giving a set of answers about, so what should we do then, it's intended to be a means of asking the right questions. What do we think our schools are for? What kind of education are we trying to offer? How does our vision help us to plan our admissions policy or the development of our multi-academy trust? How do we tackle disadvantage in a way which is true to this vision? So, for example, Jesus' test for authenticity of faith was that what we are willing to do for the least of our brothers and sisters, for the weak, for the vulnerable, for those in society which tend to get left behind. So when our vision speaks of the flourishing of every child, how will we apply this test to the way we promote new school provision, for example? Will we focus on the haves or the have-nots? Is it about the social mobility and meritocracy of the few, or are we truly for everyone? For us, the same Lord who promises us fullness of life tells us that he's the good shepherd who is not going to lose even one of his sheep. So that means that no child should ever be written off. We must do all that we can to ensure that they receive fullness of life. So our vision for dignity and respect should drive our approach to the kind of schools that we want to develop. The news and budget this week has focused attention entirely on the debate about grammar schools. But we should be interested in the well-being of every child. Our response to children with special educational needs and disabilities shows whether we consider them integral to the community and whether their success, whatever that may look like, is vital to the health of the whole school. In bidding for new free schools, we should also be exploring what we're doing for those who need outstanding special education or alternative provision, those who so often get left behind by society, as well as those who should have access to an education which develops their technical skills as an equal priority to the development of highly academic skills. And our driver should not simply be what makes the economy prosper, but what makes every child flourish so that they develop the content of their character. How will we achieve all of this? Well, it won't happen by having a nice vision that is laminated. It can only happen as we develop teachers and leaders who share that vision and who work wholeheartedly to put it into practice. In the fast-changing policy environment for schools, the role of school leaders has never been more important and never been more demanding. With so many vital issues for you to be considering, all in the context of budgets that are at breaking point, it remains crucial that school leaders promote this rounded vision for education. You don't need me to tell you, but leadership in education can be a very lonely calling at the moment. That's why at diocesan level and at national level, we're determined to harness the power and strength of our network, to turn us from a network into a movement for education. We've been asking head teachers like yourselves what their biggest challenges are. And it was striking how many times people referred to, well, primarily the budget, actually, but primarily as well the isolation that you feel. That's why we've established our Church of England Foundation for Educational Leadership, because we want to focus on leadership and provide the necessary resource that will enable us all to work together more effectively so that diocesan and school leaders can grow in their leadership roles. We're thrilled to be working with your diocese in this, and our hope is that this movement will be a reservoir of support and inspiration for everybody who shares our vision as we provide networks and programs and research so that current and future generations of leaders can have the confidence and the skills that they need to deliver this broad and rich vision for education, which really will transform individuals and schools and whole communities. So in summary, it's a vision which addresses the challenges our society faces. It's a vision that offers education for wisdom and hope and dignity and community that will lead to the flourishing of every child. I commend that vision to you and pray that you'll continue to lead your schools in line with it and help us to work together to develop the next generation of leaders as we take this vital vision forward. Thanks for listening. And I've got to now want to turn this to some discussion because we've got time, because I haven't spoken for too long, which is great. And I think coffee is at past. So we want to turn to some discussion as we begin to think about how this vision can work out as a lens through which you see your local practice, how it can sharpen its focus. So on your tables, you'll see a sheet which looks like this. Somewhere in your pack. It's headed up on the Church of England Foundation for Educational Leadership paper. Because we're aiming to develop a number of resources to help shape questions that our vision might ask of specific practice and areas of practice. I hope you've all found it. It's always dangerous to ask anybody involved in school to find a piece of paper because it reverts into 25 other conversations. But if you can just find that and have that in front of you. This is just a draft example at the moment that we'd like you to have a look at and either think about these questions or invent your own about a different area. Because what we're wanting to do is to say, well, there are a whole range of subjects which you face as school leaders. And how are you going to approach those subjects, those issues, through the lens of this vision? So this example picks out staff and student well-being, for example. But you could think of subjects like some of the ones I've already mentioned. How do we address disadvantage? How should we approach our admissions policy? How should our vision inform our collaboration with other schools? How does it help us develop our curriculum? And then ask ourselves, well, if this is a lens through which we can look, how does this vision help us to begin to ask the right questions as we address those issues, so that we're not driven by somebody else's agenda, but that we're driven by our own vision for education? So either come up with your own subject that you want to talk about on your table, or look at this one which we've given you as an example, and begin to think, how does this help us to ask the right questions? And how can this vision for wisdom and hope and community and dignity help us to ask penetrating questions about our practice in particular areas? So you've got a few moments to have a discussion about that, and then we'll try and take some comment and feedback in 10 minutes. So no time for dilly-dallying. Get on with it.